Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elliot Kallen, CEO of Prosperity Financial Group. Welcome to another episode of Meet the Expert, now top 2% of all financial podcasts in the world. Very exciting. We've got a gentleman with us, Sean Carroll from Janus Henderson. It's a very large, $750 million trillion company out in Denver. And we're talking about healthcare, therapeutics in particular. I've got a lot of questions about cancer and obesity and even robotics, and maybe we'll have time to talk about some politics in healthcare and why that sector is not heavily in a lot of portfolios. And with all these cool things coming out, it's underperforming the markets. Although right now, with the world kind of upside down with a new president, everything's outperforming the market. So, we're talking about that. So, Sean, welcome to the show.
Great to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And he manages $15 billion of diversified healthcare strategies. We'll talk about pharma, biotech, tech. We're not going to get into the world of long, short, and what that is because that's too confusing for a lot of people. What's long, what's short? And I don't understand that anyway. So if you want to reach me, I'm at Elliot, ELLIOT, at prosperityfinancialgroup.com. The name of the company is prosperityfinancialgroup.com, www in front of that. And if you need to reach me by phone, it's 925-314-8503. Again, he's with Janus Henderson. And we'll talk about the best way to get Janus Henderson products in your portfolio is come talk to me because we are portfolio builders. And my two companies here in San Ramon exceed $1 billion at this point. So, wow, let's talk about what we can do with money. So, Sean, let's dive right into this. Can we do that?
Let's do it. Excited.
Okay. So, look, I'm one of those people who takes semaglutide. I'm a GLP-1 product guy.
Okay.
I take that injection every single weekend. I'm trying to lose weight. I'm down 25 pounds. Myself and several million of my very best friends are taking the same shot. Obviously, a super hot product. Cash, another way we're doing it because I'm on the BMI obese chart, but I'm not on the other charts that you need to get it paid for. And I'm not pre-diabetic. I just need some help losing some weight here. And these are obesity drugs, even though they were meant to be pre-diabetic. So what is going on with that industry and what is going on with the investment and the dollars going into the industry? Because I don't want to forget the fact that we are a money show. So at the end of it, I like getting the shots, but we're talking about money too.
Yeah. Well, first of all, happy to hear about, your progress on the GLP-1s. I think you're like, many Americans who are realizing, the significant health benefits associated with these medicines. It's not only weight loss, but I think why we're so excited about these medicines longer term is the early data that suggests there are benefits in reducing your risks of adverse cardiovascular events, stroke, heart disease, cancer. There's even early data to suggest there may be benefits from patients who are suffering from Alzheimer's. So, in our view, these medicines are absolute game changers. And I think we're in the very early innings of penetration. So these drugs are already annualizing $50 billion in sales. And we think we're at probably single digits of penetration of what the market may ultimately be. So we could expect to see these medicines, generate, up to $300 billion in annual revenues by the end of the decade. And so we're investing behind the early leaders in this space, Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk. But I think what's really exciting about this market is that it is early. There's lots of room for innovation, disruption. And so we're also investing in companies that, for example, are developing oral versions of these therapies. So you mentioned that you have to give yourself an injection every couple of weeks, but imagine the benefits or the ease of taking these as a once monthly oral pill. I think too, there's opportunities for improvement in terms of targeting the weight that you want to lose. So fat versus muscle. Some patients, have significant side effects when they're on these medicines. So we're incredibly excited about the space. We think it grows to become the largest addressable market in pharma. I think reimbursement too will open up the market as we start to see more data around some of these other health benefits. So I think it's a really exciting area. I do think to some extent it has overshadowed innovation that we've seen in other areas within healthcare and biotech that we're even more excited about. But no doubt the GLP-1s have been the big story, and I think will continue to be the big story in healthcare for years to come.
So I want to understand more about this because I'm fascinated with it, and I'm fascinated with millions and millions of people that are considered obese. I mean, I'm 5'8", now I'm down to 225. I've been as high as 265, 270. And I'm not a little guy. I feel like I'm at my NFL playing weight now. So we're big bones. This is a 49-inch chest on a small guy. There's a lot of body here. As my wife keeps reminding me, there's a lot of body connected to you. Don't forget that. So, but this is what I understand, and help me if I'm wrong, because it's meant to be an informative show, not just a money show, and it's fascinating what's going on with these anti-obesity drugs, even though they're not called that, but they're going to be called that, I'm told, and they'll get differently categorized. But today, my semaglutide that I take is designed to help me lose weight, but it doesn't change my appetite. It just makes me feel full, if I'm correct. Then there's the Jardiance one. Maybe that's not the right product, but there's the one that has 2 ingredients to it. One is to do the same thing, make you feel full. The other one has an appetite suppressant in there, which I'm not taking. And, and so I'm forcing my brain to be the appetite suppressant, and when you have a love affair with potatoes in your life, forcing yourself to eat better is a challenge in your life. I keep kidding my wife and saying, if we ever get divorced, my next wife is going to be a potato because she's perfect. Not that my wife isn't perfect, but potato is just ever more perfect than my wife. But I'm told that the phase 3, the things that are in trials right now, are ones that you just mentioned. They target fat versus what right now, when I lose weight, I could be losing muscle mass, which is heavier than fat anyway. And that's not really doing me any good at all. So that's an issue. So how does it do that, to the best of your knowledge? And isn't that a complete game changer once you could target fat?
Yeah, no, I think it is. And I should remind your listeners that, I don't have a scientific background. My role is mainly focused on working with the investors in our strategy. But, from our team, I think, as you point out, there is a lot of room for improvement. And I think that these drugs, typically work best when combined with modifications in diet and exercise. But I think one of the big drawbacks that we are seeing today is that, many patients on these medicines, they do lose muscle mass. And I think that's why you've seen growth in other markets. For example, my wife works for a large CPG company that has significant sales growth within their yogurt and dairy products. And a lot of that has been fueled by the increasing number of people taking GLP-1s that need to significantly increase their uptake of protein. But I think that is the potential of this market. Lilly and Novo are dominating it, but I think there is a lot of room for advancement. It is a bit of an arms race that we're seeing right now, but I think, both the mechanism of action is likely to improve, moving from injectable to oral. But then I think reducing the side effects, obviously, some people feel nauseous when they're taking these medicines. So that's something that can be addressed. Even taking them less frequently is something. So some of the oral pills that are in later stage clinical trials are, pills that you can take monthly versus, twice monthly injections, what we're seeing today. And I think, the way that they work, the way they make patients feel, obviously we don't want to suppress people's appetite. But I think we do want to, find ways to minimize their intake of calories. And that's a lot of what these newer versions are focused on. But again, we're still, early stages, learning about patients' experience on these different medicines. You're seeing Lilly and Novo, continue to try to innovate within this space. And I think what's incredible is that we're just seeing increasing levels of weight loss being targeted. So, for example, Novo's most recent trial for CagriSema, its latest GLP-1, was targeting levels of weight loss around 25%. So the early versions of these medicines, were delivering somewhere between 15 and 20%. And only a couple of years later, we're targeting 25%. So we think, the progress will just continue. What's interesting is that, in that trial, Novo delivered 22.5% levels of weight loss, which, by any measure is a medical miracle. But because it didn't hit that primary endpoint, the stock was down in the fourth quarter. But I think on all the things that you mentioned, all of your experiences with these GLP-1s, you could expect to see, continued improvement and progress in your experience with these medicines.
Yeah, they are game changers and miracle drugs. And I do have that side effect of nauseousness, so I understand one of the goals of getting rid of that. But let's transition for a moment. And we're talking with Sean Carroll, Janus Henderson, and he is a client portfolio manager running the healthcare and biotech division of them. basically, and we're learning about companies and we're talking about how to make money in them. And we will get to the money side. But this is just fascinating because we're also right now talking about innovative changes. We started with obesity. Let's get to something that could take all of our lives, and that's cancer. Since many, many more companies are in the cancer research business, and we feel like they spend a lot of money, a lot of time for sometimes what seems to be why isn't there a cure for cancer out there right now? So what's going on in that industry? Because that industry was doing really well when COVID hit, and now there are a lot of feelings that COVID has changed and slowed down that entire cancer drug industry.
Yeah. So I would say, this is probably the area where we're most excited today. I mean, we've been fighting cancer now for several decades. And the earliest forms of treatment were, indiscriminate forms of radiation, chemotherapy, where you're trying to kill the cancer cells before you kill all the healthy cells. And I think what you're seeing today is moving to, much more targeted immunotherapies. So immunotherapies, perhaps the best-selling cancer drug on the market today is Merck's Keytruda, which is an immunotherapy. And the way that that works is it exposes the cancer cells, which often try to hide behind the healthy cells, which makes it much harder to target those unhealthy cells with chemotherapy. So Keytruda, exposes those unhealthy cells, making it much harder for physicians to target them via chemotherapy and radiation. So I think, that's one technology that we're really excited about. I think, the big advancements that we're seeing today, are in antibody drug conjugates. So ADCs, you could think of these as precision guided forms of chemotherapy that attach to the cancer cells and deliver the payload or the chemotherapy directly to those cancerous cells, avoiding the healthy cells. And so we're investing behind companies that are developing ADCs in a number of different indications of cancer. We think this could be probably the biggest growth market within cancer that we'll see. We're also seeing cellular therapies. So we're investing in a company, for example, that's developing a T-cell engager for prostate cancer. And there's some remarkable data coming out of a recent study that showed that PSA, which is the primary marker of patients with prostate cancer, this T-cell engager could reduce PSA levels by 50% in 100% of patients within the trial. So just really remarkable progress. So I would say that, immunotherapies, antibody drug conjugates, cellular therapies within cancer, basically much more targeted forms of chemotherapy that, first of all, deliver much better results in terms of survivability, much lower levels of toxicity for patients that are undergoing these treatments. So I think cancer treatment has come a long, long way. To your question, it may have slowed down during COVID. And I think that's perhaps because the entire world was focused on a single problem, and the FDA was having to delay applications in other disease categories to focus on those COVID applications throughout 2020 and 2021. But we've now kind of moved past that phase. And we've seen, in the last 2 years alone, 172 new therapies approved, many of them within oncology. So I think, this is an area where you can expect to see continued progress. We're even seeing companies develop, ADCs within pancreatic cancer, often referred to as the silent killer because it's very hard to diagnose and then treat. So I think more targeted treatments, ways of identifying cancer much earlier, often through routine blood screens, in some cases. So I think this is a market that we're extremely excited about, where cancer was among the leading causes of death, for the last several decades. We expect that to potentially come down with the innovation that we're seeing within the space.
Great. Well, that's great news. We're talking with Sean Carroll of Janus Henderson about healthcare and money and biotech and innovations. And I want to stick with prostate cancer if I could for a moment. Not just because I'm a man and it scares me to death, but because the surgeries and the procedures to go after prostate cancer are still pretty radical to me. You still have to have a robot. You never want a human taking out your prostate gland because there's so many side effects. And maybe the worst one being incontinence and things like that. And so you have to use robotic surgery. I know we're going to talk about robots in a moment, but every man, basically, if they live long enough, will have prostate cancer. So the saying goes. Not saying that as a medical practitioner, Um, and I know you're lowering the PSA. I'm assuming when you said we're going to lower the PSA by 50%, we're lowering the cancer by 50% too on that. But how do we do this in a way that is not so violent to men?
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets to, earlier diagnosis, of prostate cancer. And I think one of the big changes that we're seeing within healthcare broadly is that there is a greater focus on, preventative care, early diagnosis of different diseases, perhaps than there was in previous generations. And so I think that, and we can talk about value-based care, that's another trend that we're excited about within healthcare. But I think initially it comes down to earlier diagnosis, and then more targeted therapies that can avoid, ultimately having to remove these glands, through a surgery, whereas highlight there are the potential for significant, complications, after the surgery. But I think it is the big breakthrough in cancer that I should have highlighted in the last topic is, our improved understanding of the different genetic drivers of certain types of cancer. We used to understand cancer, by understanding the tissue type it impacts. So, lung, kidney, prostate, for example. And I think now we're understanding the underlying genetic mutations that may cause certain types of cancer. And so I think that's what's leading to a lot of these breakthroughs in how we treat cancer. So I think within, prostate cancer, understanding that with a routine blood test now, you can measure PSA levels, once those PSA levels, become more elevated, for those that have gone through this beyond the level of 3 and 4, where you typically start to worry about prostate cancer, then we can go through a more detailed screening process, potentially MRIs. And then with these new therapies coming to market, treat those cancers more effectively, having to limit the potential for a surgery down the road. So I think it is, earlier detection, more awareness, but then, much more targeted therapies that can avoid the need for surgical intervention.
Great. Well, that's exciting. I'm excited to hear that because I'm scared to death of having to face that as a man. And I'm sure if I was a woman with breast cancer or ovarian cancer, I'd be just as scared on that side of things too. Although in breast cancer, that used to be a death sentence 40 years ago. And today I forgot what the cure rate is, but I know it's in the high double digits now, not 100% obviously, but
even with an ovarian cancer, sorry to interrupt you. I mean, for your female listeners, that's another area where these ADCs and ovarian cancer, we're seeing tremendous progress. And so I think really across the spectrum of cancers, breast cancer being one where there's been a lot of research, over the last several decades, but ovarian cancer too, we invested in a company in 2023, Immunogen, that developed an ADC for ovarian cancer that increased survivability, 5-year survival rates, by close to 25%. And we're seeing improved versions of those ADCs within ovarian cancer. So, like prostate cancer, expect, more good news for patients at risk of that disease, in the next couple of years.
Well, that's great. Again, we're talking with Sean Carroll. If you need to reach me, it's 925-314-8503. Elliot, Elliot, at Prosperity Financial Group. And to see more of these, about 125 or so more of these episodes, they're on the website of Meet the Expert with Elliot Kallen at prosperityfinancialgroup.com. Let's talk about none of this stuff happens without the robotics world getting better and better and better. Like I said, for prostate surgery, we've learned that if you let a human go in and remove your prostate, if radical prostate surgery, you are going to end up with side effects. But if you use a robot, there's a high likelihood now that they won't touch nerves and wiring. And, apparently there's just a lot of wiring down there to get messed up. So tell us what's going on in the robotic world. That's really fascinating because that's changing everything in the surgical room too.
Yeah, I mean, it's said, you take the universe of surgeons out there, 50% of them are better than others, and we all have good and bad days. Even the best surgeons will have bad days. The thing about a robot is they're the same every day. And so there's a level of precision that you can expect through robotic surgery that you may not get, even with the most reliable surgeons out there. And so I think that, is an area we're still, again, at low levels of penetration for robotic surgery. I think that's just due to the high costs of these procedures. So we think we're at, again, single digit levels of penetration versus where we may get to by the end of the decade, closer to 20, 30% of, for example, soft tissue surgeries done through the use of robotics. And so With robotics, you're still going to have a physician, who's overseeing the surgery, who's involved in, the diagnosis and in the type of surgery needed. But I think, with robots and even with AI assisted robotic surgeries, with AI, these robots are learning from previous procedures. So they just become increasingly more efficient, by learning from, the steps in previous procedures, things to focus on, things to avoid. And I think that is the real breakthrough, not just the steadier hand of a robot versus a human surgeon, but the power to learn from the thousands or, in some cases, tens of thousands, similar procedures that were done and what went well and what could have gone better. And just the continuous learning that you would get through the power of AI. So, I think, moving forward, robotics will become, hopefully more common again for probably soft tissue surgeries. But I think as people get more comfortable with the technology, as the costs of these potentially come down, that should be good news for patients. And there's really benefits, not only for patients, better outcomes, fewer side effects, but also from this perspective of hospital systems, shorter recovery, shorter stays in the hospital. So I think like anything we invest in within healthcare, we're really focused on, really one of two objectives. How does this help to make the healthcare system more efficient? How does it change the practice of medicine? Robotic surgery is one area that could, look to add increasing efficiency within the healthcare system by lowering cost, improving outcomes. And so it's an area that we're excited about. One of the leaders in the space, Intuitive Surgical, is a company that we've been investing in for quite some time.
Great. So you're telling me there, Sean, that my liver and my prostate are not unique to me. They're just, and millions of people look the same, act the same, smell the same color, everything. Here I thought I was unique to Elliot Kallen, and now I just found out that outside a couple of wires in my brain and a couple of little things on my face, there's no difference, is there?
No, if and when you need to, and I hope you do not need to go in for that prostate procedure, you will hopefully have the benefit of learning from the thousands that have done before you. And I think that, really just speaks to the potential of AI, in healthcare, where we see many, near-term applications, but several long-term benefits.
Great. Let's get into something that's a little bit more esoteric, maybe uglier, for just a moment. We won't spend much time on that. And it's healthcare and politics, because the healthcare industry has been an underperformer. We just recently had a CEO of a healthcare insurance company get murdered. And there are people that cheered on the murderer and are willing to pay for his entire defense, which is really sad that we've reached that state of hatred towards insurance companies. But that's not new in this country. I know people that hated Blue Cross or Blue Shield or Health Net or Kaiser, and they don't like anything about them. Wanting people dead is a whole nother level of hate, and cheering them on. But let's face it, politically speaking, the healthcare industry is being vilified in this country. And, and I have a daughter that is moving in a few weeks to the Netherlands. And her big thing about moving there, when I look at quality of life and measurements and why Denmark and Sweden and the Netherlands come out 1, 2, and 3 in the quality of life, is healthcare being paid for, right versus privilege, all-inclusive versus a la carte. Lots of differences between what Europe does, some of the world does, and what we do. And capitalism versus government control. Are we on the right track? And I know that can't be answered with a word yes or no, but are we on the right track, or are we shooting ourselves in the foot along the way?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and there is no simple answer to it. As you point out, I think unlike other parts of the world, our healthcare system, is far more complex with the blend of private insurers, and then Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act. It's just a complex system, unlike other parts of the world where you have nationalized forms of healthcare where everyone gets equal access to the same level of healthcare. And there are certainly benefits to that. If you think about, providing health insurance for all, whereas in here, we can choose how we access healthcare, and we can choose, whether or not we're willing to pay more or less for it. But I think, with that comes more complexity. How do these different health insurers negotiate the price of drugs, for example? That has significant impacts on the cost of prescription drugs that you don't see in other parts of the world. And so, I think there is room for improvement to make the healthcare system, a little bit more efficient, to ensure that we're providing healthcare for all. But I also think that we enjoy access in the United States, to, for example, access to some of the best therapeutics in the world, access to, cutting edge research, in a broad variety of disease categories. So there's a level of innovation that we have access to in the United States, that in some cases, may justify the cost. For example, if you're a patient who's suffering from rare disease, or a rare form of cancer, you're getting access to some of the best treatment here in the United States. But I do think it's a fair comment to say, are we paying too much for it in the U.S.? Are we doing too much to subsidize the cost of drugs for other parts of the world? And so I think some of the reforms that you've seen, for example, allowing Medicare to, negotiate the price of drugs for the 10 largest within the Medicare system, we thought those were helpful reforms that lowered the, maximum out-of-pocket cost for seniors. And I think investors were concerned, what might this mean for pricing power of the large pharma companies? And really what we saw was that there was an offset, what they might have lost in pricing power, they gained in volumes by making these drugs more affordable. So I think, we are on the side of there are ways to make the healthcare system more efficient. I think moving to, for example, value-based care is something that we're excited about. So value-based care basically being, let's incentivize insurers, hospital systems, doctors, not for the number of procedures, the volume of procedures, but let's incentivize them based on outcomes. And I think that could be a really powerful transformation within the system. We also think expansion of the prescription drug price controls within the IRA, expanding that to 15 or 20 could be beneficial as well. Again, we don't think that will do anything to slow the innovation coming out of the biotech sector, focusing on developing life-saving medicines in areas of high unmet medical need. But not to say that, there aren't things that we could learn from other parts of the world in terms of ensuring access to healthcare for all. And I think, hopefully this new administration will be focused on some of those issues, helping to find ways to make the healthcare system more efficient. But there certainly is more work to be done.
Great. So last question here. This has been great. We've been talking with Sean Carroll, who is with Janus Henderson there, and he runs the biotech group, about $15 billion. And this has been great. And if you want to have the healthcare industry, the biotech industry, robotics in your portfolios, come talk to us, because we are portfolio builders at www.prosperityfinancialgroup.com, or Elliot, ELLIOT, at prosperityfinancialgroup.com. So as we pull this together, Sean, why is it with all these amazing innovations, all this creativity, all this unbelievable brain power going into this important sector, why is it financially not doing better?
Yeah, it's the $1 million question. It's the one that, we've been scratching our heads to. Healthcare versus the S&P 500 has underperformed the broader market in 4 of the last 5 years. 2022 was the one outlier. But with, as I mentioned, 132 new therapies approved in the last year, many of these novel therapeutics in disease categories where there is no available treatment today. Broadly speaking, healthcare had to go through a bit of a COVID hangover where, biotech performed extremely well, pharma likewise. Those companies were probably due for a bit of a pullback. And then, we had rising utilization that weighed on managed care companies. But, I think it's really been a combination of factors. The Fed, raising interest rates to fight inflation throughout 2021, 2022, that weighed on the biotech sector. But we think now, moving forward, earnings growth should look much better for pharma companies, biotechs, small and mid-cap biotechs, which were mainly responsible for delivering those 132 new therapies, are trading at a significant discount to the broader market. Managed care companies have been able to reset premiums to deal with higher utilization. So earnings there should look much better. And I think even within the medical device, area, they had to go through a level of inventory destocking post-COVID. We think that has largely occurred. So fundamentally, the sector is about as healthy as we've seen in several years, maybe several decades. It's trading at the largest discount we've seen to the S&P 500, really in 2 or 3 decades. So the entry point is as attractive as it's been in quite some time. I think it's just the last couple of years, there's been a preference, rightfully so, for gaining exposure to large cap tech, the AI secular theme. And I think investors have forgotten about, not only the, growth potential in particular within small and mid cap biotech companies, but also the fact that healthcare can be defensive when you need it to be. In 2022, when US and global equities were down 18%, healthcare was only down 5%. And so I think you're seeing some of that today where, healthcare year to date is outperforming their broader market. I think you're seeing a rotation into more defensive sectors. And I think that's benefited large cap pharma, managed care companies. But I think, from our perspective, where we are most excited going forward is the innovation we're seeing within biotech. Those 132 new therapies that we think sets up the next decade of revenue growth for these companies who are trading at a discount. And I think really what's weighed on that sector has been, policy uncertainty with the new administration, the specter of higher interest rates. But I think as we have more drugs approved, as we potentially see M&A pick up, we think that should serve as a tailwind for the biotech sector. So, across the spectrum of healthcare, we're expecting better performance going forward. I think it's, as a portfolio builder, this, it can introduce a level of diversification and defensiveness into a portfolio, into portfolios that may be a little bit overexposed to areas of the market that may be due for a pullback. So, for a number of reasons, we're excited about healthcare. As your, clients and listeners have questions about the sector, consider us a resource, to help think through some of those questions.
Great. And does Janus Henderson have a biotech product?
Yeah, so we manage 15 billion in healthcare assets. The majority of that, 12 billion, is invested in a diversified healthcare strategy, investing across pharma, biotech, managed care, health, and medical device companies. But we do also, offer biotech-specific strategies, a long-short biotech hedge fund, as well as a long-only biotech vehicle that's available to offshore investors. But really, that's been the unique expertise, of the firm. We've been managing this healthcare strategy for over 20 years, and most of the outperformance has been from, picking biotech stocks that are having success, launching new therapies. And I think that's what we're trying to give investors more exposure to in those biotech specific strategies, is the innovation that we're seeing in those smaller biotech companies.
What is that called?
So it is the Biotech Innovation Fund, and it's a vehicle that's available for qualified investors. So it's a hedge fund, and then the broader healthcare strategy, which is about a third invested in biotech, is available in multiple different formats, mutual fund, as well as a separately managed account.
Well, this has been great. We've been talking with Sean Carroll of Janus Henderson. If you like these kind of podcasts, they're all on a website at www.prosperityfinancialgroup.com, as well as all this information. It's just tremendous. And we continue to love putting these out because we educate people. We find interest in them. And hopefully you've learned something here, because I've learned something on basically 120 of the 125. That's all brand new for me. So that's just great. Sean, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you again real soon.